Sir, civilians are not authorized in this facility. The young Marine sergeant's voice was sharp as steel as he blocked the 85-year-old man trying to enter the recruiting office. This is official Marine Corps business only. The mall entrance is that way, Grandpa. The elderly man stood in the doorway of the Marine Corps recruiting station in downtown San Diego, his weathered hand still reaching for the door handle. At 85 years old, Harold Brennan cut a frail figure in his faded blue windbreaker, worn khakis, and scuffed brown loafers. His thin white hair barely covered his spotted scalp, and his pale blue eyes watered behind thick-lensed glasses that seemed too heavy for his nose. I just wanted to see. Hal's voice was barely above a whisper, his words trailing off as he looked past the sergeant at the recruiting office. The walls were covered with modern Marine Corps posters, the few, the proud, emblazoned over images of Marines in digital Marpat camouflage, M4 rifles at the ready. A large flat screen played a recruitment video showing Marines fast roping from Ospreys. Sergeant Derek Rodriguez, all of 24 years old, stood rigid in his perfectly pressed blue-dress Charlie uniform. His shooting badges gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and his Iraq campaign medal sat prominently among his 3 ribbons. He'd been a recruiter for 6 months now, after 2 tours in the sandbox, and he had no patience for mall wanderers disrupting his workspace. "Look, Pops," Rodriguez said, his voice softening slightly but still firm. "I get it. You probably knew some Marines back in your day. Maybe you want to reminisce or something, but we've got actual work to do here. I've got 3 poolies coming in for their IST prep, and we don't have time for—" "Poolies?" Hal interrupted softly, a slight smile crossing his weathered face. "We used to call them boots. Or fresh meat, depending on the DI's mood." Rodriguez rolled his eyes. Another wannabe. Every strip mall recruiting office dealt with them, old guys claiming they were Marines, wanting to relive glory days that probably never existed. Half of them couldn't even name their supposed MOS. Behind Rodriguez, 2 other recruiters looked up from their desks. Staff Sergeant Williams, a female Marine with a combat action ribbon from Afghanistan, exchanged a knowing glance with Lance Corporal Chen. They'd seen this before. Some senior citizen would claim to be a Marine, waste an hour of their time with made-up war stories, then admit they were actually Army, or worse, had just watched a lot of war movies. "Sir," Williams stood up, her voice professional but cold. "Unless you have a son or grandson interested in enlisting, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. This is a working military office, not a social club." Hal's trembling hand reached into his windbreaker pocket, and Rodriguez instinctively tensed. The old man pulled out a small, worn photograph. It was black and white, creased from decades of handling. He held it out with shaking fingers. "My grandson," Hal said quietly. "Lance Corporal Timothy Brennan, KIA, Fallujah, 2004. Second battle, November 10th. His voice caught slightly. "On the Corps' birthday." The office fell silent for a moment. Rodriguez glanced at the photo. A young Marine in dress blues, the same proud smile every Marine wore for their official portrait. "I'm sorry for your loss," Rodriguez said, his tone more respectful now but still dismissive. "But that doesn't mean you can just—" "He died trying to save his squad," Hal continued, as if Rodriguez hadn't spoken. "Threw himself on a grenade. They gave his mother the medal posthumously." The old man's eyes grew distant. "Just like they gave me mine." Rodriguez snorted. "Right. You have a Medal of Honor. Look, Grandpa." "Not a Medal of Honor," Hal corrected gently. "The Navy Cross." February 23rd, 1945. He looked at the recruitment posters on the wall, particularly one showing Marines raising a flag. That was quite a day. Chen laughed from his desk. "February 23rd, 1945? You're claiming you were at Iwo Jima, the flag raising." He shook his head. "Sir, that's disrespectful to real Marines who—" "I wasn't in Rosenthal's photo," Hal said simply. "The famous one. I was there for the first flag. The small one. Schreier's patrol. We went up at 10:20. His eyes found a specific spot on the wall, as if seeing through it to something decades past. The second flag went up around noon, better for photographs. Williams pulled out her phone, ready to fact-check the old man into embarrassment. Every recruiter knew how to handle stolen valor cases. But something about the specific times, the mention of Schreier, details that weren't in Hollywood movies, made her pause. "What unit?" she asked, testing him. "2nd Battalion, 28th Marines. Easy company." Hal's response was immediate, automatic. Though after the first week, we were barely a platoon. Started with 235 men. 40 of us walked off that island. Rodriguez crossed his arms. "Anyone can memorize unit numbers from Wikipedia. If you were really there, prove it." "What was your commanding officer's name?" "Which one?" Hal asked with a sad smile. We went through 3. Started with Captain Severance. Good man. Made it through somehow. Our platoon leader, Lieutenant Schreier, led us up Suribachi. He paused, his hand absently rubbing his left shoulder. I can still feel where the Japanese sniper got me. 2 days after the flag. Corpsman said I was lucky. Inch to the right and I'd have lost the arm. Chen was typing rapidly on his computer. "Harold Brennan, Easy Company, 28th Marines." His fingers stopped. His face went pale. "Staff Sergeant, you need to see this." Williams walked over and looked at the screen. The National Archives database showed a military record. Brennan, Harold J. Private First Class, USMC. Navy Cross citation for extraordinary heroism on 23rd of February 1945 during the assault on Mount Suribachi, Iwo Jima. When his patrol came under intense machine gun fire, PFC Brennan single-handedly assaulted an enemy pillbox, eliminating the position and saving the lives of 12 Marines, enabling the patrol to secure the summit. The silence in the recruiting office was deafening. Rodriguez's mouth opened, then closed. Chen slowly stood up from his desk. Williams stared at the screen, then at the frail old man in the doorway. "You're..." Rodriguez's voice cracked. "You're Harold Hellraiser Brennan. The Brennan you're in the Marine Corps Museum. There's a whole display about the first flag raising." Hal shrugged slightly, his thin shoulders barely moving. "Haven't been called Hellraiser in about 60 years. These days the kids at the grocery store just call me Sir when they help me to my car." "Why didn't you say something immediately?" Williams asked, her voice now filled with respect. "Why let us..." "Would you have believed me?" Hal asked gently. "An old man claiming to be a war hero? I've learned it's easier to let people reveal themselves first." He looked at Rodriguez. "You reminded me of myself at your age, Sergeant. So certain. So protective of our Corps. That's good. Marines should be proud. Should guard what's ours." Rodriguez's face was burning red with embarrassment. "Sir, I am so sorry. I had no idea. I should have..." "You should have done exactly what you did," Hal interrupted. "You protected your office from what appeared to be a confused civilian disrupting military business. That's your duty." He stepped fully into the office, his gait slow but steady. "Though perhaps, in the future, you might consider that not all battles leave visible scars, and not all warriors look like warriors anymore." Chen scrambled to pull out a chair. "Please, sir, sit down. Can we get you anything? Water? Coffee?" Hal waved him off gently. "I didn't come here for special treatment. I came because..." He paused, looking at the Poulet information packets on Rodriguez's desk. "I wanted to see where my grandson signed up, where he made the choice to become a Marine. His mother couldn't bear to come here, but I needed to see it." Williams pulled up another record on her computer. "Lance Corporal Timothy Brennan, 1st Battalion, 8th Marines, Silver Star and Purple Heart posthumous." She looked up at Hal. "Sir, your grandson was a hero. The citation says he saved 6 Marines." 7, Hal corrected softly. The 7th died 2 days later in Germany, but he got to call his mother first. His eyes misted. "Timothy called me before he deployed, asked me what Iwo was like. I told him the truth, that it was hell, but that his brothers would be worth it. They're always worth it." Rodriguez found himself standing at attention without realizing it. "Sir, would you be willing to speak to our poolies? They're about to ship to Paris Island, hearing from someone like you." Hal looked around the modern recruiting office, so different from where he'd enlisted in 1943. Back then, it had been a wooden desk in a post office, a harried sergeant with a cigarette dangling from his lips, and a line of boys lying about their age. "They still run the Crucible?" Hal asked. "Yes, sir. Final test before they earn the Eagle, Globe, and Anchor." "We didn't have the Crucible," Hal mused. "We had the real thing 3 weeks after boot camp." He was quiet for a moment. "But yes, I'll talk to them. On one condition." "Anything, sir," Williams said quickly. "Stop calling me sir. I worked for a living. I was an enlisted Marine, like you." A ghost of the old Marine fire flickered in his eyes. "And someone get me a proper cup of coffee. Not that fancy stuff you kids drink now. Black, strong enough to float a .45 round." Chen practically ran to the coffee maker while Rodriguez pulled up chairs. Within minutes, word had somehow spread through the strip mall. The poolies arrived early, confused to find their recruiters treating an elderly civilian like visiting royalty. "Who's the old guy?" one poolie whispered. Rodriguez overheard and was about to snap at the kid, but Hal raised a weathered hand. "I'm nobody special, son. Just an old Marine who walked up a hill once." He looked at the young men and one woman preparing for boot camp. "But let me tell you about the Marines who didn't make it back down." For the next 2 hours, Harold Brennan held court in that recruiting office. He didn't tell war stories of glory and heroism. Instead, he talked about fear and how to face it, about the weight of responsibility for your brothers and sisters in arms, about how the title Marine isn't given, it's earned and then re-earned every single day. "The Corps will break you down," he told the wide-eyed poolies. "That's its job. But it's not to destroy you, it's to rebuild you into something that can survive the worst humanity can create and still hold the line. Still protect those who can't protect themselves." One poolie, barely 18, raised his hand nervously. "Mr. Brennan, were you scared? On Iwo Jima?" Hal laughed, a raspy sound. "Scared? Son, I was terrified every second of those 36 days. Anyone who says they weren't scared in combat is either lying or crazy. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's doing your job despite the fear." He looked at Rodriguez. "Your recruiter here has a CAR. Ask him about fear. I guarantee you he knows exactly what I'm talking about." Rodriguez nodded slowly. "Fallujah, 2009, second deployment." He looked at the poolies. "Mr. Brennan's right. The fear never goes away. You just learn to function through it because your Marines need you to. That's why we're Marines," Hal said simply. "Not because we're fearless, but because we're more afraid of letting each other down than we are of dying." He touched the photo of his grandson still on the desk. Timothy understood that. In his last seconds, he understood that. As the afternoon wore on, more Marines arrived. The commanding officer of the recruiting station, who happened to be nearby, stopped in and stayed. A retired gunnery sergeant who ran the barbershop next door came over. The poolies' parents, who had driven them to the appointment, listened from the doorway. Hal talked about boot camp in 1943, about crossing the Pacific on a troop ship, about the first time he saw combat. But mostly he talked about the Marines he served with. Farm boys from Iowa, street kids from Brooklyn, cowboys from Texas. Boys who became men in the crucible of war. "We had a saying on Iwo," Hal said, his voice growing tired but still clear. "When the Army and Navy looked on heaven's scenes, they found the streets were guarded by United States Marines." He smiled slightly. A lot of Marines earned their guard posts those 5 weeks. Finally, as the sun began to set through the strip mall windows, Hal stood to leave. Every Marine in the room, from the lance corporal to the major, snapped to attention. "Before you go, sir," the major said, breaking protocol, "would you do us the honor?" He gestured to the ceremonial bell mounted on the wall, the one rung when a new recruit signed their contract. Hal walked slowly to the bell. His weathered hand, the same hand that had pulled the trigger on Mount Suribachi, that had dragged wounded Marines to safety, that had saluted too many flag-draped coffins, reached for the rope. He rang it 3 times. Clear, strong notes that echoed through the office. "Once for those who came before," he said. "Once for those who serve now." He looked at the poolies. "And once for those who will carry on after we're gone." As he turned to leave, Rodriguez stepped forward. "Mr. Brennan, wait." The young sergeant removed his EGA from his collar and held it out. "I know you have your own, but would you take mine? To remember that the Corps you built is still here, still strong." Hal accepted the eagle, globe, and anchor with trembling hands. For a moment, the years fell away, and Rodriguez could see the young Marine who had stormed Mount Suribachi. "Semper Fi, Marine," Hal said quietly. "Semper Fi." Every voice in the room responded. As Hal Brennan walked out of the recruiting office and into the California sunset, Rodriguez turned to the poolies. "That man is why you're going to Paris Island. Not to become him. None of us could be him, but to become worthy of standing in his shadow." 6 months later, at their graduation from boot camp, every one of those poolies would remember the day they met a legend. And 50 years after that, they would tell their grandchildren about the afternoon Harold Hellraiser Brennan taught them what it really means to be a Marine.